Welcome to the new episode Czechoslovakia and Velvet Revolution. Czechoslovakia was created in 1918 following the collapse of Austro-Hungarian Empire after World War I. It was established as a democratic republic uniting the Czechs and Slovaks. During the interwar period, Czechoslovakia experienced economic growth and political stability under the leadership of President Thomas Masaryk. The country became one of the most industrialized states in Central Europe. In 1938, Nazi Germany occupied the Sudetenland, a border region with a significant ethnic German population. In 1939, Slovakia declared independence under a pro Nazi government. The remainder of Czechoslovakia was occupied by Germany. Resistance movements such as Czechoslovak government in exile and the Czechoslovak resistance played significant roles during the war. After World War II, Czechoslovakia was liberated by the Soviet Red Army. The country emerged from the war with significant losses and underwent communist rule under the leadership of the Communist Party of Czechoslovakia. In 1948, Czechoslovakia became a communist state following a coup d'etat orchestrated by the Communist Party of Czechoslovakia. The country was aligned with the Soviet Union and was a member of the Warsaw Pact. The communist regime suppressed political dissent and controlled the economy and media. In 1968, Czechoslovakia experienced a period of political liberalization known as the Prague Spring. Communist Party leader Alexander Dubček implemented reforms aimed at creating socialism with a human face. However, the Soviet Union and Warsaw Pact allies invaded Czechoslovakia to suppress the reforms. In 1988, in Czechoslovakia, formerly known as the Czechoslovak Socialist Republic, is getting a bit restless. Its leader was the first secretary of the Communist Party, Miloš Jakeš. Miloš Jakeš famously led the purges of the 1970s. The Communist Party was very much in control of Czechoslovakia at this point. In 1989, Czechoslovakia underwent a peaceful transition from communism to democracy during the Velvet Revolution. Mass protests led to the resignation of the communist government, and opposition leader Václav Havel became the country's president. There wasn't suffering from a great deal of dissent, as was the case in Poland or East Germany. Quality of life there was slightly higher than the rest of Eastern Europe. The markers of modern life, like television, were widely available. Along with a lot of mass media, it was tightly controlled by the government. This prevented notable dissidents such as Václav Havel from reaching an audience. This isn't to say that the people of Czechoslovakia didn't have any complaints. Many, especially the young, had a great deal throughout 1988 and 1989. There were demonstrations throughout the country, notably in Bratislava, as well as the capital, Prague. These were merely calls for reforms, though, and weren't revolutionary in nature. The government did little about them. In fact, the communist government had seen what was going on throughout the Eastern Bloc, so they made some superficial concessions to make it look like they were willing to reform. On the 17th of November 1989, a student demonstration took place in Prague to commemorate the murder of a student by the Nazis 50 years earlier. Many of these students then started chanting anti communist slogans. This led to the police dispersing the protesters. Rumors spread that a student had been killed by the police, and for many, this was the final straw. Tens of thousands then took to the streets. Strikes were called in Herville, along with other noted anti communist figures. They made their way to the capital in what is known as the Velvet Revolution. Strikes spread and protests grew in number. The entire communist government resigned on the 24th of November. He was replaced by Karel Urbanek, who was a much more moderate communist. But by this point, many people were simply sick and tired of the broader regime and Urbanek. Urbanek held onto power for a whole 5 days. However, he did end the Communist Party's monopoly on power before resigning. After several weeks of negotiations, a compromise government was established. This government, for the first time since 1948, was majority non communists. Havel was made president of Czechoslovakia by this government on the 28th of December. Soon after this, he gave a blanket pardon to all of the Czechoslovakia's political prisoners. Minor reforms were undertaken, but the process of formally ending communism and transitioning to a capitalist model needed to wait for this new government to gain legitimacy. This was done via elections in June of 1990. Havel retained the presidency. Central parliamentary elections were won by the Civic Forum, which then ruled alongside with Slovak equivalent, the Public Against Violence Party. The separation of the anti-communist bloc into Czech and Slovak parts is indicative of a brand new problem that Czechoslovakia now faced. The resurgence of nationalism, which communism had previously suppressed. This doesn't mean that this nationalism couldn't be dealt with. The majority of Czech and Slovak citizens, along with their politicians, were in favor of maintaining the Czechoslovakian Union. A new election in June 1992 saw two new frontrunners: the Civic Democratic Party led by Václav Klaus and the Movement for a Democratic Slovakia led by Vladimir Mesiar. Amid 1992, Klaus and Messier sat down to discuss what the new Czechoslovakia would look like, and they couldn't agree on anything. Messier wanted the Slovak half of the country to have its own currency and more autonomy than the Czechs wanted to give it. Messier's demands were largely his own, and Slovak politicians would have been quite happy to simply approve of a union of equals. Instead, he made it clear that the Czechs didn't really care, and so it was better for them to both go their own ways. The Slovak National Assembly voted in mid July to create a new constitution and a fancy new flag for their new country, the Slovak Republic. It was agreed that Czechoslovakia would divide on January the 1st, 1993. The Slovak Republic and the Czech Republic thus went their own ways in what is called the Velvet Divorce. Few people in their country were really that upset about the breakup. Barring Havel, but no one listened to him anymore. But also, few were happy about it. The breakup of Czechoslovakia is interesting not simply because it gave the world two new nations, but because it is one of the only national disillusionments that came about on a tide of apathy. I hope you enjoy this episode and thank you for watching.